and I don't know. But I rather would like to take the freedom to say,
a man stands alone in an empty stadium at 3 in the morning. No orchestra, no lights, no 60,000 people. Just him, a violin case, and a decision he has not yet made. I said this months ago, and I will say it again right now. The most dangerous moment in Andre Rieu's life did not happen on a stage. It happened in a quiet office, staring at a number so large it should have ended everything he built. Picture a young violinist named Thomas, a fictional stand-in for the thousands of musicians who once looked at Andre Rieu and thought his whole idea was madness. Thomas is not real. But the doubt he represents was very real. In almost every rehearsal room Andre ever walked into, Thomas watches the new conductor smile at the audience instead of ignoring them. He watches musicians laugh mid-performance. He watches an orchestra behave like something forbidden in the world. Thomas was trained in warm, unguarded, human. Thomas leans toward the musician beside him and
I'm comfortable too, with other things, with the daily life now.
Whispers one sentence. This will never work. He was almost right. For years, it almost didn't. Thomas watched Andre try again anyway, rehearsal after rehearsal, correction after correction, refusing to let the idea die simply because one skeptical violinist thought it was foolish. And that is exactly where this story begins. Because before Andre Rieu became the man who filled stadiums with waltzes, he was a boy who grew up inside a house where music was treated less like joy and more like discipline. Born in October of 1949 in Maastricht, Andre entered a family shaped entirely by his father's career as a professional conductor. There was no casual music in that home. There was rehearsal. There was correction. There was the constant, invisible pressure of doing something exactly right. At 5 years old,
And to make it beautiful now, there is a lot of...
a violin was placed under his chin for the first time. It was too big for his hands and too serious for his age. But something in him responded to it anyway. He once admitted that his first teacher's vibrato fascinated him the way a single trembling note could feel almost alive. That detail is easy to skip past. Do not skip past it. Because a 5-year-old noticing the difference between a correct note and a living note is not a small thing. It is the entire blueprint for everything that came after. Imagine that same 5-year-old boy standing in a hallway outside his father's rehearsal room, listening through a closed door because children were not always welcome inside. He hears the orchestra swell. He hears his father's voice correcting a phrase. He presses his ear closer to the wood, memorizing something he cannot yet name the exact moment a note stops being technique and starts being feeling. Nobody told him to notice that difference. He simply could not stop noticing it. Years of formal training followed conservatories in Maastricht and Liege, then the demanding halls of the Royal Conservatory in Brussels, until he earned his Premier Prix in 1977. On paper, his path was set. Join an orchestra, perform the classics, stay inside the lines drawn by generations before him. And for a while he did exactly that, taking a position with the Limburg Symphony Orchestra. Here's the twist nobody expected. The music was flawless. The audience was frozen. Night after night, Andre watched people sit in respectful silence, admiring precision from a careful distance, as if the concert hall had installed an invisible wall between the stage and the seats. He began doing something almost nobody else in that world was doing. He stopped watching the musicians. He started watching the audience. And what he saw changed the direction of his entire life. The moment a waltz played, something shifted. Shoulders loosened. Feet tapped. Strangers glanced at each other the way people do when a memory is stirred. The wall cracked, just slightly, just for three-quarter time. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. A rhythm anyone could follow, and somehow everyone wanted to. That was the spark. Not rebellion for its own sake, a conviction that beauty should never require intimidation and elegance should never demand distance. He wanted opera beside film music. Strauss beside laughter. Formal musicians standing shoulder to shoulder with an audience, finally allowed to feel something out loud. But an idea like that needs more than a dreamer. It needs someone willing to say the hard, necessary things the dreamer does not want to hear. For Andre, that person was Marjorie. They reconnected as adults and married in 1975, and from that point forward, Marjorie was never simply standing in the background of his career. She became one of its architects. Andre supplied the vision. Marjorie supplied the structure underneath it, the contracts, the risk management, the discipline required to keep a fragile dream financially alive. Picture the two of them at a kitchen table late at night, long before any of this had a name. Andre sketching an idea for an orchestra that smiled at its audience. Marjorie asking the uncomfortable question nobody else in the room wanted to ask: how do you pay for it if nobody comes? That question was never an attack on the dream. It was the reason the dream survived long enough to be tested in public at all. In 1978, the same year their first son, Mark, was born, Andre founded his first small orchestra. Their second son, Pierre, arrived in 1981. A family and a musical future were being built at the exact same time, on the exact same uncertain ground. By 1987, Andre and Marjorie had founded the Johann Strauss Orchestra. It began small. No guarantee of an audience, no certainty the idea would ever travel beyond a modest stage in the Netherlands. Now here is the open loop worth sitting with for a moment, because everything that made Andre famous almost never had a chance to be discovered at all. Record labels did not know where to place him. Was he classical? Was he popular entertainment? Nobody had a shelf built for what he was doing, and an artist without a shelf is often an artist without an audience. Then, in 1994, a single piece changed the trajectory completely, a sweeping, aching composition his listeners came to know simply as the Second Waltz. It carried grandeur and sorrow in the same breath, and it turned his album into a genuine sensation across the Netherlands. The empty chairs started filling. But the moment that proved his instinct correct, the moment I keep coming back to, happened somewhere nobody expects a waltz to belong. A football stadium. In 1995, Andre performed during halftime of a major European match in front of roughly 60,000 football fans who had come for adrenaline, not elegance. He lifted his violin anyway. And something extraordinary happened. The crowd began to sway. Somewhere in that crowd, imagine a supporter named Rutger, another fictional face, standing in for thousands of real ones that day. Rutger came for the match, wrapped in his team's colors, already hoarse from shouting. He did not come for a violinist. But when the melody rolled across the pitch, Rutger felt his shoulders drop without deciding to let them. He turned to a stranger beside him, someone he had never met and would likely never see again, and for 8 bars of music, they swayed together like old friends. That single afternoon told Andre everything he needed to know. People did not need permission from critics to feel something. They only needed an invitation. From there, the rise accelerated at a pace that surprised even people close to him. Tours expanded across Europe, into the Americas, through Australia, across Africa and Asia. The costumes grew grander, the stages grew larger. Chandeliers, flowers, sweeping staircases, every performance became less like a concert and more like an occasion. Yet not everyone was clapping. Traditionalists accused him of softening something sacred. Critics said the spectacle overshadowed the music. Andre's answer was never an argument. It was another sold-out night. He rarely responded to the criticism directly. He simply let the next arena, the next square, the next standing ovation answer for him, because a man surrounded by 10,000 people crying happy tears does not need to win a debate about whether his art counts. Somewhere in the middle of that ascent, his father passed away in 1992, just before the international breakthrough that would carry his son's name around the world. Sit with that for 1 second. The son spent years quietly building a new relationship between classical music and everyday people. And the father who shaped his early discipline never got to witness where it led. Maybe that is why Andre's stage presence feels less like performance and more like conversation. Every time he turns toward the crowd, every time he invites them to stand or laugh or reach for someone beside them, it almost feels like he is answering a silence from his own childhood. He was not simply continuing his father's legacy. He was quietly rewriting it. And then, at the height of his success, Andre made the single riskiest decision of his career. He decided to build a palace, not metaphorically, literally. After performing at Vienna's Schönbrunn Palace, Andre became captivated by its grandeur, and instead of simply remembering that night, he decided to recreate it transported, piece by piece, to stages around the world. The production required roughly 120 containers of set pieces, fades, and staging elements designed to make an arena feel like Imperial Vienna. Picture the ambition of that for a moment. Now, picture the cost. Because behind the shimmering visuals, the financial pressure was mounting: fast transportation, construction, storage, staffing, until reports placed the resulting debt above 30 million euros. Here's the central irony of Andre Rieu's entire story: the larger his dream became, the closer it came to destroying him. Audiences saw chandeliers and smiling musicians. Behind the curtain, the company he had spent decades building stood on the edge of collapse. This is the part most biographies rush past, and it deserves more than a passing sentence. Because success does not remove fear. Sometimes it hands fear something far bigger to threaten. Picture Andre alone in an office late at night. The same kind of silence that opened this video, staring at spreadsheets instead of sheet music. No audience to perform for. No orchestra to hide behind. Just numbers. And the growing possibility that the palace he built to make people feel something might end up taking everything away from the people who depended on him. Andre was no longer risking only his own name. An entire orchestra depended on him. Technicians, drivers, seamstresses, office staff, and entire traveling families stood on the same financial ground he had gambled. It was Marjorie, alongside their son Pierre, who helped steer the company back from the edge. Pierre had grown deeply involved in the production side of the business, and he understood both his father's creative instincts and the very real consequences those instincts could carry. Andre later admitted, in his own words, that he had ignored sound advice before taking that gamble, and he promised Marjorie and Pierre he would never risk the company's survival that recklessly again. That promise matters more than people realize, because the mistake did not kill his ambition. It disciplined it. He still dreamed at a massive scale afterward. But he learned that a dream left unprotected can devour the very people it was meant to inspire. Slowly, the company recovered. Tour by tour, the debt began to shrink, and the clearest proof of that recovery was waiting exactly where his story began: Maastricht. Since 2005, his summer performances on the Vrijthof Square have grown into something closer to a pilgrimage than a concert, drawing visitors from countries most of them had never previously connected to a single stage. The boy who once struggled to fill seats now performs for a square filled with people who planned entire vacations around one night of music. Nearby stands a historic castle. Andre eventually made his home the same kind of building he once dreamed about as a child, taking violin lessons nearby. But the true monument of his life is not the castle. It is the orchestra itself, a group many musicians stayed with for decades, a traveling community Andre often called a family. That claim was tested in ways nobody could have predicted in 2020. When the pandemic silenced live performance worldwide, Andre Rieu's entire universe went still. Arenas emptied. The Vrijthof concerts vanished from the calendar. For an artist whose entire career depended on shared physical energy in a room, that silence was not simply inconvenient. It threatened the very purpose of everything he had built. A waltz needs bodies moving together. A camera cannot rise from its seat and dance. For nearly 2 years, the machine built around him sat almost entirely still, and financial support from the Dutch government helped keep the organization alive during that stretch. Once again, the dream survived because it had grown larger than any single person, including Andre himself. Imagine one of his violinists during those quiet months, sitting alone in an apartment somewhere in Europe, running through scales with no stage waiting on the other end of them. She did not know if the orchestra would ever gather again. She kept practicing anyway, because some part of her still believed the silence was temporary, and some part of her needed to believe it more than she needed proof. When touring finally resumed, something in the atmosphere had changed. Audiences were no longer simply attending a concert. They were celebrating the fact that gathering was possible again. By 2023, he resumed his interrupted tour across America, and in the years that followed, he marked his 75th birthday, released new music, and celebrated 50 years of marriage to the woman who had stood beside every version of this story: the young dreamer, the financial gambler, the recovering businessman, the grandfather still walking onto a stage. 50 years. Before the fame, she was there. Before the near collapse, she was there. When the truth needed to be spoken plainly, she was the one willing to say it. Their son Pierre remained deeply woven into the production side of the empire. Their son Mark built an identity of his own, refusing to simply live in the shadow of a famous surname. By the middle of 2026, André stood at 76 years old, with tour dates already scheduled into 2027, still walking onto stages, carrying every version of himself at once. The 5-year-old holding an instrument too big for his hands. The frustrated young musician who felt something suffocating in a silent concert hall. The husband who needed a partner strong enough to challenge him. The showman swaying 60,000 strangers inside a stadium. The man who nearly lost everything to a palace made of containers. The grandfather still searching the crowd for one more person, ready to feel something. Now return to Thomas for a moment, the young musician who once whispered that none of this would ever work. Imagine him standing in the crowd decades later on the Wrethov Square, watching an entire generation of strangers move together through the same 3/4 rhythm he once dismissed. He was wrong, not because the music itself was flawless, because he underestimated how badly people were waiting for permission to feel something in public again. He watches an elderly couple near him hold hands without speaking, their eyes fixed on the stage, and he finally understands what he could not see decades earlier, that the audience was never applauding the technique. They were applauding the invitation. That is the quiet lesson buried underneath the costumes and chandeliers. Andre Rieu did not simply sell tickets. He sold permission to cry during a waltz, permission to dance beside a stranger, permission to remember someone who could not be there. So here is the question worth sitting with long after this video ends. What did it actually cost Andre Rieu to make that kind of permission possible for millions of people? It cost years of being misunderstood by an industry that did not know where to place him. It cost the approval of critics who believed elegance required distance. It cost a fortune, gambled on a palace that nearly ended everything, and it cost the willingness to be told by the people closest to him that his ambition had gone too far and the humility to actually listen. But look at what all of that purchased in return. A stadium full of football fans swaying to a Russian waltz. A historic square turned into a yearly pilgrimage. An orchestra that became a genuine family, a 50-year marriage that survived triumph, near ruin, and silence. And millions of strangers who for 3 minutes at a time felt less alone beside whatever empty chair they carried into that crowd. Which chapter of this story hit you hardest? The silent concert halls that pushed him to rebel? The football stadium that proved his instinct right? Or the palace that nearly took everything away? Tell me in the comments, right now before you scroll past this. And if stories like this, the hidden cost behind extraordinary lives, are exactly what you come here for, subscribe. Because the next one is already waiting. Because somewhere tonight, another arena is filling. Another chair is sitting empty beside someone in the crowd. Another Thomas is standing in the wings, doubting whether any of it will work. Another Rutger is wrapped in a scarf that has nothing to do with music, about to feel his shoulders drop for no reason he can explain. And another orchestra is about to prove, one more time, that people were never too far gone to dance.